Yes, hello again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. And as you can see, we're out and about in the sunshine once again. And this time we've made the journey to Ian Ridley's superb Wittas Park venue here near Bassenthwaite to hold round 5 of the Northern Classic and Twinshock Racing Championship. Now, this event here is being hosted by the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club, but unfortunately this does not include a round of their current championship. Now, as I said, this track here at Wittas Park is a purpose-built motocross venue. Everything is in place, so there's not much work for the club to do with regards preparing the track for a race event, because this track does cover all manner of disciplines of motocross, from the old vintage classic bikes right up to the relatively modern plastic motocross machines of the current era. Now, as yet, I don't have a schedule or programme as to how the races are going to be run today, but we're going to be covering every single class, from the early pre-1960s bikes right up to the relatively modern bikes of the 1980s twin shockers. So it's all happening here at a very sunny Wittas Park, and of course, before we see any bikes take to the track, we have to do our usual Paddock walkabout and take a look at some of those quite nice machines that are soon to take part in this Northern Classic and Twinshock event here at Wittas Park. Now, just before we get down to looking at our first machine, a quick update on our Paddock walkabout, where, as you can see, the weather here on this Saturday was absolutely superb, although the few riders that had arrived on the Saturday decided not to put their bikes out on show. So although the weather was good, we never managed to film any bikes on that day. But fast forward to Saturday night, early Sunday morning, we had quite a good downpour that lasted until about 9:30 in the morning, and with the first practice all due to start in under an hour's time, I certainly did have to just whiz around as many bikes as I could before they all took to the track. So the ones that are featured in this clip are the lucky few, and I just physically never had time to catch any more. So apologies to anybody who was hoping to get their bike on CDB TV for this weekend. Okay, so first up, it's a quick glance at John Idden's 1982 Yamaha YZ490, which I'm pretty sure is another one of those monoshock Yamahas that have been given a new back end and swing arm to make it eligible for twin shock racing. But this kind of upgrade or downgrade, if you like to call it that, is very common nowadays on these YZ Yams. And in fact, I've personally come across at least 3 or 4 of these 490 twin shock conversions, and by all accounts they do appear to be very competitive. And in John's case here, I've seen this particular bike race quite a few times in the past, and John's usually running at the sharp end of the pack, normally chasing Peter Williamson's Honda, which again is another one of those Honda twin shock adaptations of a later monoshock Honda dirt bike. Now, I do remember John on the day I took these clips, during our brief conversation, he was singing the praises of this 490 Yamaha engine, which he said was an absolute belter, and so far it's been very reliable. So he said that the guy that built this engine had certainly made a good job of putting it all together. But here at the back of the YZ, where all of the transformation has taken place by removing that single monoshock and welding mounting lugs onto the swing arm and chassis so that it can then take 2 twin shock units instead. And although I'm not 100% sure, I think this pair here look like they could be maybe a pair of Falcons or certainly something similar. But as I said, it is quite common nowadays to take these later monoshock Yamahas to convert them for twin shock racing, and it's also popular on the bigger Hondas as well, which tend to be the top two chosen machines for these kind of engineering conversions. Anyhow, that's our first bike there, John Idden's YZ490 Yamaha. Next up, it's our first British classic of the day, and this one here is Alan Dale's 1967 Cheney BSA 500, another one of the vintage bikes that you'll be able to see in the pre-1968 class, which I think this round also includes the pre-60s and pre-65s in that class as well. But again, these classic Cheney BSAs are quite typical of the kind of machines you'd have come across if you were to attend a local scramble event in or around your area during the 1960s, and many of the big names in British scrambling rode these kind of bikes, and if you're of a certain age and you do remember those old black and white BBC grandstand winter scrambles that they used to broadcast live on TV, then it was bikes such as this one here of Alan's, and many of the other British classics like maybe Greaves and Matchlesses and HISs that were the mainstay of race bikes for that era, because of course the Japanese invasion was still another 10 years or so down the track. Although, as I mentioned, it was a bit of a rush trying to cover as many bikes as I could in the short time I had available, because I had hoped to get some bikes during the nice sunny weather on the Saturday, which of course didn't happen. And in fact, with the heavy rain we had on the Sunday morning, I wasn't even sure if we were going to manage it at all. But thankfully, Alan and a few others had their bikes out and ready to go, so we grabbed as many as we could in the short time available. So that's basically the reason that these clips of the Paddock bikes are a little shorter than usual, because I had to do a quick dash around the Paddock to be able to be back on the track for practice beginning. But nevertheless, this old British classic here is another nearly original looking machine, despite maybe some later rear shocks and a couple of other slightly modern parts bolted onto it. Although you don't see too many of these Cheney BSAs in and around Paddocks these days, but certainly this one here of Alan Dale's is without doubt a little cracker. Anyhow, moving right along, and next up, another nice pair of 125 twin shockers, and this pair here are Dave Cartledge's 1980 Honda CR125 and his quite nice RM125 Suzuki, which I'm assuming is also from 1980, because I think these twin shock RMs were the last of their breed before Suzuki then shifted to monoshock suspension and liquid cooling in 1981. Anyhow, let's first have a quick look at Dave's CR125 Honda, another one of those very popular 125s that are the staple diet of many riders who compete in the current air-cooled 125 championship. And if you were to go along to one of those championship events, you'll certainly see plenty of these CR125s and RM125 Suzukis taking part. And when you see a race with maybe 20 or so of these little two-stroke screamers leaving the start line, it's certainly quite a spectacle. Now, looking at these little compact CR125 two-strokers, they can certainly pack a punch considering their relatively small stature, and there wasn't really any downside with these CR engines when they were first made, because every part was absolutely spot on, and not only in the engine department, because even for the early 1980s, this bike here was the class of its field, and it had quite a good front and rear suspension setup as standard, and that along with this potent little power pack certainly made these smaller Hondas very popular with schoolboys and adults alike. And also in 1980, these CR125s would have had Honda's Showa front and rear suspension units at that time, and the bike's rear swing arm would have been made of steel, which you can see Dave's bike still has, of course, but here at the back of Dave's Honda, the original Showas have been replaced with a nice pair of YSS piggyback units, and these will certainly be a massive upgrade on the old Honda original Showa suspension units. But anyhow, Dave's 125 is fully kitted out and ready to take to the track, but Dave's Honda isn't a fully original example of a 1980 CR because he does have a few upgrades and other accessories fitted to make the bike a bit more easier to use on the track. But nevertheless, it's a lovely little 125 rocket ship, and super quick as well, as you'll soon find out when we get around to posting all of the racing highlights from this event, where you can see this bike here and many more in action on the track. And so this was Dave's other pocket rocket, which is of course a 125 RM Suzuki, and I'm guessing that this bike again is from 1980, although it might even be a 79 model, I'm not exactly sure. But once more, it's another well turned out 125, and I don't know if Dave's going to be racing both of these bikes, or maybe one of them is maybe used as a spare or standby machine, but it certainly is CR125 that's listed in the race program, so we'll just assume that that one there is his number one go-to race bike. So as we eventually make our way around to the power plants on these RM125s, and once again these are quite similar in their performance to the CR Hondas. It's a compact little reed valve two-stroke that, as I remember, I think it pumped out around the 27 horsepower mark, which of course wasn't too shabby for such a small 125 motor for 1980. And if my aging memory is still functioning as it should, I'm pretty sure that these engines had a 6-speed gearbox as well, so there were plenty cogs inside this motor to keep your left foot quite busy dancing up and down on that short shifter. And once more here at the front end of our Suzuki, as I recall, the stock factory Suzuki forks were pretty good for their time period. There wasn't a lot that you could do in terms of making adjustments to the rebound or compression, but you have to remember that this was the suspension technology of its day. And here at the back, these RMs did have an alloy swing arm as a stock fitting in that year, and this one on Dave's bike certainly looks like it's the real deal. So it was quite a big thing to have an alloy swing arm on a Twinshock dirt bike in the early 1980s, when many of the other manufacturers like Honda were still using steel arms on their Twinshock motocrossers. And also here at the back of our RM, I'm not sure what kind of shocks Dave's actually bolted onto the back of this bike, but I expect that they are not the originals from 1980. But most of the bike's other components on this little RM125 certainly look like they're the proper parts. So you can almost decipher that these RM125s were quite the package, and as per the CR125, they're it wasn't really a lot to choose between the two bikes in terms of the performance on the track, although maybe the CR Honda did have the edge ever so slightly because it was a Honda and certainly more popular with the riders who rode them. But certainly a nice pair of Twinshock 125s from Dave Cartledge, both superbly turned out, as you can see, and good to go, and hopefully you'll be able to see at least one of them take to the track when Dave races them in the pre-1989 125, 250 and 500 class. Now, of course, you can't walk around a classic or twin-shock racing paddock these days without bumping into at least one Maico, and in this case here we've got two for the price of one. Now, the number 49490 isn't actually listed in the race programme, so I'm assuming that that bike is either a late or a day entry, so it wouldn't have been listed in the programme anyhow. But the number 771 bike there is David Maliborn's 81 250. But we'll start with this 490, which I must say is an excellent example of one of these iconic Maico twin shockers. And what can you say about these Mega 2s that hasn't already been said before, other than these are still one of the best open class twin shockers that were ever made. Because let's face it, for 1981, this German built bruiser had it all, had decent suspension on the back and at the front. Well, decent by 1980s standards anyhow. And this rocket ship here had a fantastic chassis, and of course that brutally quick 490 engine, with this one here having the more desirable reed valve motor as opposed to the earlier piston porter. But apart from having maybe a different pair of rear shocks and replacement seat cover and maybe a replacement exhaust and tailpipe, it's still quite a tidy looking bike, and I'll wager quite quick on the track as well. But as I said, as to the name of its rider, I don't actually know because it wasn't listed in the programme on the day's proceedings. Whereas on the other hand, we do know that this 1981 250 belongs to David Maliborn, and you can just see him there on the right of your picture. And once again, a bike quite similar to the one that I used to race myself about, I think it was 150 years ago now, but although mine of course didn't have those black wheels, which I was just about to issue David with a red card for, until of course he politely pointed out that he didn't put these wheels on the bike, and it was the previous owner who had to take the blame for that misdemeanor. So as you know, this is the baby brother of the big 490, and I think it had much the same chassis as the bigger bike, and many of the other parts were more or less much the same as the Mega 2, although naturally this bike here did have a little less power due to it being the smaller 250, which again was a reed valver, as you can see, with the stock Bing carburetor now swapped for a much more modern flat slide Mikuni. But if you're looking for a decent twin shocker clubman racer's bike, then these 81 250 Maicos are without doubt the perfect starter bike, because they did have excellent handling manners, and of course that 250 two-stroker gives you just enough power without scaring you shitless, as you'd soon find out if you were to swing your leg over that much bigger 490. Right, so as I continued my quick dash around the paddock, I came across Stephen Riley's quite nice 1977 Yamaha 500 thumper, another quite tidy piece of twin shock Hardware, a bike that I've seen racing quite a few times recently at various tracks around the country, and I remember Stephen telling me that this bike here had a Terry made chassis, and inside it's powered by a big TT500 Yamaha thumper motor. And as big as four-stroke thumpers go, this one here of Stevens is certainly a cracker, although I never had any time to get the full list of the parts that went into creating this big monster of an engine, which I'm assuming is just a stock TT500 four-stroke, although I can see that it's also had the usual scalloping done there on the barrel by machining off every second cooling fin. Now, the rear suspension, as you can see, are a good quality pair of YSS piggyback shocks, which once again are very popular with these guys who ride these older twin shocks, because these YSSs do have quite good scope for making adjustments to the rebound and the damping, and they're also fully rebuildable as well. So you can see how they're so popular with the riders who use them. Of course, they're not as expensive as the Swedish Ölands, but they're sensibly priced and quite good quality. So I suppose those are the determining factors when choosing to buy them. But once again, this bike of Stevens is another one to look out for when he races this bike in the pre-1978 class, when we eventually get down to posting all of the racing highlights from this event. But another high quality four-stroke thumper there from Stephen Riley. Now, fortunately for me, parked right next to Stephen's Yamaha was another quite nice thumper, and this one here is Dave Ellis's 1977 550 Yamaha four-stroker, and this one here looks like it's got an American-made C&J chassis, who I'm pretty sure are no longer trading these days, but nevertheless another Yamaha four-stroke thumper with the motor's engine oil contained in the bike's frame, just like the old TTs and XT trail bikes had back in the day. Now, I certainly couldn't get a proper good look at Dave's thumper because of where and the way it was parked up, but it was still quite impressive nonetheless, and I did notice that it had another pair of those YSS piggyback suspension units on the rear, and some of the other parts that caught my eye on this bike were these very nice pair of American-made Yoshimura tailpipes, which definitely gave this bike a completely different look to Stevens' Yamaha, and I can only imagine the sound that comes out of these tailpipes when that big 550 Yamaha engine gets fired into life. And I suppose if you were following this bike on the racetrack, then there's probably no way that you'd mistake it for a buzzy two-stroker with these pair of beauties sticking out the rear. And you can see that it does give this big four-stroke thumper a very unique profile when it's viewed from the back. So, as I mentioned, just a very brief look at these two bikes, Stephen Riley's 500 and Dave Ellis's 550, a nice pair of Yamaha Twinshock four-strokers. Now, here's something that you don't see every day, a couple of KX Kawasaki's at a classic and Twinshock race event, and these pair here are Martin Speak's 1981 250 on the left and Aaron Ward's 1980 250 there on the right, that number 45. Anyhow, it's quite surprising that you don't see too many of these older Kawasaki's around the race events these days, because they are certainly few and far between in this modern age, but maybe these Kawasaki's didn't have the same allure as the more popular Hondas, Yamahas or Suzuki's of their day, because I don't think that these were actually bad bikes. And I remember a friend of mine who was, and he still is, a top class twin shock racer who used to race one of these KXs back in the 1980s, and he always told me that these bikes were one of the best that he had ridden during that era. And I also remember that these 250 KXs had quite a decent reed valve two-stroke engine, which I think had a 5-speeder gearbox, and this one here of Aaron's is in quite good original condition, although I think that that's a different type of swing arm from the 1980 original, and this Yoshimura tailpipe is different from what would have been just a black mild steel item in 1980. But you can see this engine of Aaron's 250 looks like it's already been racing with all the track dust around the engine, and I do remember him telling me that if he knew it was going to be on CDB TV, he'd have given it a bit of a wash and a scrub up. Anyhow, this next KX250 is a 1981 model with the now improved single monoshock at the back to replace the older twin shockers of the 1980 bike. Now, I'm not sure as to how many more improvements were made to this 81 model over Aaron's 1980 bike, but I suppose the most significant improvement was that switch from the older twin shockers to this modern single rear shock at the back. Now, here in the engine department, it was still a two-stroke reed valve motor with the same 5-speed gearbox as well, but although this was just a 250, this KX motor could still quite hustle you down the track at a good rate of knots, and when it came up against the CR250 Hondas or RM Suzuki's of an equivalent size, then these KXs were highly competitive and generally reliable as well. And Martin's KX250 motor even looks like it's still got the original exhaust expansion chamber fitted to this bike, which is very rare. But we definitely need to see a lot more of all of these older Kawasaki's taking part in twin shock racing, because when you do attend these kind of vintage or twin shock race events, you'd probably be able to count the amount of Kawasaki's you come across on just one hand. So these nice pair of Martin Speaks and Aaron Ward's green minis are without doubt a refreshing start to hopefully what is a KX Kawasaki revival. But moving right along, next up it's another quite nice original looking racer, and this is Steve Goodfellow's 1977 RM125 Suzuki. Another cracking example of one of these iconic bikes from the golden years of the 1970s, when some of the world's top motocross celebrities used to cut their teeth on these very quick RM125s. Now, once more, I'm pretty sure that these 77 RMs were titled the 125Bs in that year, and although Steve's bike looks quite original, that alloy rear swing arm is definitely different from the 77 original, as I think it would have been just a simple black painted tubular steel item in that year. Now, this two-stroke engine that was fitted into the 77 125 was again a fantastic little motor, and on the day that I shot these clips, I do remember Steve telling me that this engine is in its original condition and is the very same one that came fitted with the bike from the factory in that year, and as yet this engine hasn't been tampered with, so That certainly says quite a lot about the reliability and the build quality of these smaller 125s. But as you'd expect, not all of the parts on Steve's vintage Suzuki are the originals, which you've got to expect on a 48-year-old off-road race bike, especially if it's getting regularly used every weekend like this one here. And on the back of our RM, it's a pair of Vintco air shocks, which are, I think, clones or copies of the old Bob Fox air shocks from the late 1970s that for their day were certainly the latest thing in motorcycle suspension technology, and they're still very popular even here in 2025. So anyhow, that said, Steve's old 77 RM125B is without doubt a survivor and certainly a piece of history from the 1970s, and the best part of its existence is that it's still being used regularly, as of course all of these old timers should be. And of course I'm talking about the bike and not personally Steve himself, of course. Anyhow, moving right along, and next up it's the turn of Mark Rucroft's RM400 Suzuki, which is actually listed in the race program as a 1982 RM465, so I don't know what that was all about, but maybe Mark's got a 465 tucked away somewhere where we can't see it. But anyhow, this is another good quality RM Suzuki, and this one here is with the Twinshock suspension, so it'll probably be around 1980 or thereabouts, because I'm pretty sure that Suzuki had their full floater monoshock rear suspension in 1982, so I'm guessing that this bike's a bit earlier than that. So here at the back of the bike, it's a pair of Dutch-made Riger piggyback suspension units, another popular choice with many of the riders who race these old twin shockers. And with regards this 400 two-stroke Suzuki power plant, I'm not exactly sure if this one here has had some tuning done or upgrades to its internals, because most of these bigger bore motors usually do get some kind of work done on them at one point in their lives, and I'm guessing that this one here is certainly no different. But on their day, these RMs were super quick, and although these were maybe only 400s, they could still hold their own against the much bigger 500 open class bikes. And here we also have a reed valve intake motor, a CDI electronic ignition, and of course I think it was a 5-speed gearbox as I remember. So these 400 RMs were fully loaded, as you can imagine. And as we make our way on to the front suspension department, I'm pretty sure that these forks that are fitted here are slightly different from the stock factory items, because these forks look like they've certainly been beefed up, and maybe these have even been taken from a much later Suzuki model. And here's another look at those piggyback Riger shocks, which of course will be a massive improvement over the stock factory ones that Suzuki fitted to this bike back in the early 1980s. But anyhow, another nice open class Japanese twin shock racer. That's Mark Rucroft's RM400 Suzuki. Now this was a nice trio of Honda red rockets. Now I'm not exactly sure as to who they all belong to, but that number 22 bike on the left there is Peter Carr's 79, and the number 14 bike on the right I think is Anthony Pye's 1980 model. But there was also that nice 250 there in the centre that didn't have any numbers on it, so who knows, it might even have been a spare bike for one of those two riders. But again, a very tidy example of one of those iconic Honda red roosters, as they were often known to the guys who rode them. But this number 22 bike of Peter Carr's is certainly one to look out for when you take a look at the racing highlights, because this is one very fast machine, as you'll soon discover. And Anthony Pye was, it looked like he was busy spannering his number 14 red rocket there, so I thought it was best just to leave him to get on with it and not get in the way, because he looked like he was quite busy. So this other old rocket was, I think this was Matt Bateman's 1978 model, and you can see that this one here has been quite well used down the years, although the other intriguing thing about this bike was that the motor was fitted with one of those new American-made smart carbs to replace what would have been, I think, a Kian unit originally. But basically these smart carbs have no jets inside the carburetor at all. It's just a simple metering needle that runs down the centre of the carb body, which is slightly adjustable, but apparently they do work very well, and they fit a multitude of different motorcycle engines. But there's certainly more information available on the internet if you want to know a little bit more about these smart carbs. Right, so next up, it's a bike that we're very familiar with here on CDB TV. This is Trevor Petrie's 600 JBR Rotax, one of two bikes that we did feature here on my channel a couple of years ago. And so basically, this bike here has a John Hand Racing chassis, and is based on the old John Banks JBRs that were very popular in the early 1980s. But inside that John Hand chrome-plated frame is a big 600cc Rotax 4-stroke power plant, a well-proven motor that's certainly powered a multitude of motorcycles in the past, an engine that has an unbelievable reputation for power and reliability, and as long as you do all the regular maintenance tasks, then this engine could quite easily take you to the moon and back without any issues. Now, as I said, we did do a full feature on this bike of Trevor's and his brother's one as well, which was identical in almost every detail, so it's certainly worth a look if you're into your big 4-stroke thumpers and these big Rotaxes in particular. So although this is just a very brief look here, the full story is quite easily accessible through Classic Dirt Bike TV. So when we eventually get around to posting all of the racing highlights from this Northern Twinshock Round 5 event, you may want to look out for this bike here in the racing footage, and this is Mark Fulton's 500 Twinshock Honda, which is basically a ballistic missile with Honda badges stuck to it, and you can see Mark on the left there just getting all kitted out, putting his race gear on, ready for the start of his first race. Now, of course, this isn't an original Honda Twinshocker, but this is one of Honda's later monoshock chassis that's been modified for Twinshock racing. And as I remember, I think the bike was originally built by Stuart Bland, who did all of the surgery and engineering to change it from a single shock back end to this Twinshock configuration. And here in the engine department, we've got a full 500 reed valve motor, although the bottom end of this engine is from a later liquid-cooled Honda Crosser, whereby the top end is then been reconfigured with an air-cooled barrel and head. And here on this right-hand side of the crankshaft you can see where the original water pump used to be, but has now been removed and blanked off. Anyhow, look out for Mark and his big 500 Honda when he's racing this bike in the Twinshock over 45 age group class, where it should be quite easy enough to spot when this big red rocket gets its clearance to fly. Okay, so we're going to finish off our Wittas Park round 5 walkabout by taking a look at Tony Barnes' 1974 540 CCM, which is another good quality example of the kind of British-made race bikes that the great Alan Clues was building at his Bolton factory in Shifnal Street back in 1974. Now, in the past, I've always had this bike of Tony's down as being one of the original Alan Clues 74s, but during a recent conversation, Tony told me that this is another Joe Maxwell reproduction chassis, and it's certainly one of the very early Joe Maxwell 74 replica frames that he built, with this one here being frame number 002, so it's obviously the second chassis that Joe made when he began reproducing these 74 replica bikes. But at first glance you'd never be able to tell if this was an original Clues built bike or a reproduction one, because these are more or less a carbon copy of the stock Clues design, other than of course those CZ hubs and brakes, which naturally weren't used on the 74 originals, but because you can't source original CCM hubs and brakes nowadays, these CZ ones are certainly a decent alternative. But there's no question that Joe Maxwell is certainly the guy to speak to when it comes to sourcing parts or information about these repo Clues classics. And if you're flush and you do have some disposable income just lying around kicking its heels, then Joe will even build you a complete bike ready to race, because he not only builds these 74s, he also does other CCM models as well, including those carbon copies of the 350 CCM trials bikes from 1978. But Joe's website is definitely worth a visit at joemaxwellengineering.com, because Joe not only manufactures CCM parts and sells them on, his knowledge and expertise on these old Clues bikes is unrivaled, and he's certainly a good source of information about how the CCM company operated back in the day. And also when you consider that back in the early 1970s, when Alan Clues took this, what was basically at the time a BSA 500 4-stroke road bike engine, which he then reworked and he tuned it for more power, the end result was a motor that was more than capable of taking on the best of the big 2-strokes, which of course were dominating motocross during the 1970s. So although this Tony Barnes bike here might not be a fully authentic CCM from 1974, this will still give you a little insight into what Clues competition machines were putting out through their doors in 1974, because in the next 20 years or so, Clues went on to build some fantastic off-road motorcycles, and many of them were very highly competitive, although with the masses of imports from Japan and the many different models that you could choose from. The small Bolton-based CCM concern just couldn't compete with the volume and the price of the ones from Japan. But anyhow, a nice bit of British-made history there to finish off our Paddock walkabout at Wittas Park. That's Tony Barnes' lovely Joe Maxwell Engineering 1974 540 CCM. Well, there you go. I do hope you enjoyed having a look at some of those nice bikes that are soon to take part in this Northern and Classic Twinshock Championship Round 5 here at Wittas Park. But of course, coming up soon will be all of the racing highlights, and you can see many of those bikes that we've just had a look at, and plenty more when they take to the track for this Round 5 event. So if you haven't already subscribed to CDB TV, then I do hope you take the time to do that very small thing, because that way, if you subscribe, you'll be notified immediately every time I upload a brand new video. So from all of us here at Wittas Park for this Round 5 event for the time being, it's cheerio for now.